You light it without thinking. A small flame, a slow inhale, and something in your brain exhales before your lungs do. It feels ancient, and that is because it is. The story of humans and smoke did not begin with a cigarette or a pipe or a hand-rolled leaf in colonial Virginia. It began before agriculture, before language as we know it, before your ancestors had a word for fire at all. And the answer to when humans started smoking is far stranger, far older, and far more revealing about who you really are than any public health warning ever told you. Let us start with the fire itself. Your ancestors did not invent fire. They inherited it. The earliest controlled use of fire by a human ancestor dates back roughly 1.5 to 2 million years ago, long before Homo sapiens walked the earth. Researchers at the site of Wonderwork Cave in South Africa found evidence of ash and burned bone dating back around 1 million years, suggesting that Homo erectus, a distant relative of yours, was already managing flames. But here is the part that rarely gets mentioned. Where there is fire, there is smoke, and where there is smoke, there is inhalation. Your deep ancestors were breathing smoke long before any of them made a conscious choice to do so. This matters more than it sounds. Paleoanthropologist Richard Wrangham, in his landmark work on the cooking hypothesis, argues that fire fundamentally rewired the human body and brain. Cooking food unlocked more calories. It softened meat. It killed parasites. But it also meant that for thousands of generations, your ancestors sat close to flames every single night. They slept near fire. They cooked near fire. They gathered in circles around fire. And every one of them inhaled smoke. Not by choice, by proximity, by necessity, by survival. Your lungs have been breathing smoke for a very, very long time. But intentional smoking, the deliberate act of drawing smoke into the body for a specific effect, that is a different question. And the trail of evidence for it leads somewhere unexpected. The oldest confirmed evidence of deliberate plant inhalation comes not from tobacco, but from cannabis. A 2019 study published in the journal Science Advances, led by researcher Yimin Yang and a team from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, analyzed ancient wooden braziers found in the Pamir Mountains of western China. These wooden burning bowls, found in tombs dating back approximately 2,500 years, contained residue of high-THC cannabis. The researchers concluded that mourners at these burial ceremonies were deliberately burning cannabis over hot stones and inhaling the smoke as part of a ritual for the dead. This was not accidental exposure. This was intentional. This was the first chemically confirmed instance of humans using smoke to alter their mental state, 2,500 years ago. But that is almost certainly not the beginning. Because here is what the archaeological record keeps whispering. The rituals that show up in the written and chemical record are almost always older than the records themselves. By the time a behavior is formalized in a ceremony, placed in a tomb, and preserved well enough to survive millennia, it has usually been practiced for a very long time in less formalized ways. Ethnobotanist Gary Paul Nabhan, who has spent decades studying the relationship between indigenous peoples and psychoactive plants, argues that human experimentation with smoke-producing plants almost certainly predates any surviving physical evidence by thousands of years. The plants were there. The fire was there. Curiosity is the oldest human trait there is. So what happens when a curious human, sitting by a fire 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000 years ago, accidentally burns a plant and feels something shift? They notice. That is what humans do. They notice, they remember, and they repeat. Tobacco itself enters the story later, and specifically in the Americas. The earliest confirmed evidence of tobacco use dates to somewhere between 12,000 and 13,000 years ago, based on nicotine residue found in a hunter-gatherer site in Utah. A 2021 study in Nature Human Behavior, led by archaeologist Daron Duke, reported the discovery of charred seeds from a wild tobacco plant, alongside a fire pit and stone tools at a site called Wishbone in the Great Salt Lake Desert. This pushed back the confirmed history of tobacco use by thousands of years beyond what was previously known. The people who used this tobacco were not farmers. They were nomadic hunter-gatherers. They had no ceramic pipes. They likely burned the leaves directly in the fire, or chewed the leaves raw. And the nicotine did what nicotine always does. It reached the brain in seconds. And here is where it gets stranger. Because nicotine does not just create addiction. It sharpens attention. It increases alertness. It suppresses hunger. For a hunter-gatherer tracking an animal across a landscape for 12 hours, these are not trivial effects. These are survival effects. Researcher Johannes Kaplan at the University of Arizona has examined the neurochemical relationship between nicotine and human cognition, noting that at low doses, nicotine acts as a cognitive enhancer, improving memory consolidation and sustained attention. Your ancestors who used tobacco may not have been indulging a weakness. They may have been self-medicating for endurance in a world that demanded everything they had just to stay alive. Smoking, in this light, looks less like a bad habit and more like a tool. But it was not just nicotine. The ancient smoking record includes dozens of plants across dozens of cultures, and the pattern that emerges is consistent enough to be striking. Wherever humans settled, they found the psychoactive plants in their environment, figured out how to burn them, and built rituals around the smoke. In the Andes, the Tiwanaku people were inhaling vilca seeds, which contain a naturally occurring DMT compound, through elaborate carved snuffing tubes. In Mesoamerica, the Maya were burning copal resin and tobacco in ceremonial pipes at least 2,000 years ago, with depictions of smoke and ritual inhalation carved into stone monuments at sites across the Yucatan. In sub-Saharan Africa, cannabis pipes made from animal horns and clay bowls have been dated to around 1,400 years ago, suggesting independent development of smoking technology on multiple continents. Humans did not need to teach each other to smoke. They each figured it out on their own, because the ingredients were everywhere. And the human brain, it turns out, was always ready to receive. The brain has receptors specifically shaped to receive compounds found in plants. Your endocannabinoid system, the network of receptors that responds to cannabis, did not evolve because your ancestors smoked. It evolved for entirely different reasons: to regulate pain, appetite, memory, mood. But the compounds in certain plants fit those receptors like a key in a lock. And at some point, an ancestor of yours found the key. This is not a coincidence. This is co-evolution. Researcher Michael Pollan, in his exploration of the relationship between humans and psychoactive plants, argues that this is one of the most profound and least examined partnerships in natural history. The plants that produce these compounds are not producing them for humans. They produce them as defenses against insects, as chemical signals, as evolutionary armor. But humans, through fire and curiosity, and the long trial and error of survival, discovered what those compounds did to a primate brain. And from that moment on, the relationship between humans and smoke was locked in. It never really went away. Every civilization that followed found its own version of this relationship. Ancient Egyptians burned kefi, a compound incense made from at least 16 ingredients, some of them psychoactive, in their temples. The oracle at Delphi in ancient Greece is now believed by researchers including John Hale and Jella de Boer, who published their findings in geology, to have delivered prophecies while seated over a fissure in the earth that released ethylene gas, a psychoactive compound, from the rock below. Smoke in the ancient world was not just a byproduct of fire. It was a technology. It was medicine. It was a door. And the door, once opened, proved nearly impossible to close. The modern cigarette is a recent invention, mass-produced only from the late 1800s onward, industrialized and chemically enhanced in ways your Paleolithic ancestor would not recognize. But the impulse underneath it, the reach for smoke as a way to shift the state of your mind, to calm, to sharpen, to connect with something larger than the immediate moment, that impulse is ancient. It is older than your language, older than your religion, older than your species in the form you know it today. When you feel the pull of something that promises to change how you feel, just for a moment, just enough to take the edge off, that is not a modern weakness. That is a very old kind of intelligence, a survival instinct that once sat around a fire and watched the smoke rise and thought, what if? The fire is still burning, the smoke is still rising, and somewhere in your brain, the oldest part of you already knows what it does.